Today I want to talk about the fact that the Daily Wire recently fired Candace Owens, and I know I'm late to this party. It's been a while, right? Um, I'm not just late to the party in the sense that the Candace Owens thing has kind of run its course in the news, but I feel like I'm the very last person to get a YouTube channel and start talking about this stuff. But to be perfectly honest, the thing that really brought me in, the thing that really dragged me back, was watching conservative talk radio kind of implode. I'm not going to lie. I have this sort of weird connection to conservative talk radio in that I've been listening to it since before I really knew English. My dad used to have it on in the car when I was an infant. And they'd have it on in the house too. They'd have it on at work, wherever we were. Conservative talk radio was always on, and it's been weird. It's been weird watching this stuff implode. You've got the Daily Wire that feels like it's imploding. I don't know if it actually is, but it feels like it. And then you've got Steven Crowder, who's imploding, and then there's the Blaze, and I don't really know what's going on over there. But it just, everything has sort of just kind of, just become pretty gosh darn irrelevant, hasn't it? Weird, weird. Some people will say that conservative talk radio was always irrelevant. I don't think so. I honestly think that the quality of talk radio used to be better, and a lot of it does come down to the fact that first of all, there used to be debates. There used to be debates, and over time, for whatever reason, conservative talk radio decided it didn't want to debate people anymore. I don't know when that happened. I don't know why it happened. And to be honest, the reason that I don't know when or why it happened is because I stopped listening finally. But it took a long time. It took a real long time. I stopped listening to different show hosts for a number of reasons, and it was different. The Daily Wire to me started to represent this sort of this weird desire on the part of people like Ben Shapiro to become the new mainstream, and I think that that's actually where conservatism always goes wrong. I think conservatism is at its worst when it's mainstream and popular. And I think it's just not. It's not. It's not when all the cylinders are firing. It's better as, ironically enough, a sort of countercultural position that says, we don't like what's happening, and here's why. And I think that the very nature of the Daily Wire was created to make conservatism mainstream. And so I never really liked it. It's weird, because if you think about it, if you were following Ben Shapiro's trajectory for any given amount of time, you'll remember that the reason why a lot of people liked Ben Shapiro in the beginning, myself included, was because he was this dark horse firecracker who, a lot of the show hosts in the realm had become very dusty. It was a lot of the same sort of Rush Limbaugh copycats, and then all of a sudden here comes this fast talking firecracker Harvard attorney who's mad as hell and facts don't care about your feelings, and he comes on to Pierce Morgan and he rips Pierce Morgan apart, and everybody loved that. And it was because he was saying things that were true. It's because he was saying things that went against the grain. And the entire concept of the facts don't care, that facts don't care about your feelings in general, is countercultural. Right? Because right now, common culture, if you walk into your average office building, and you talk like facts don't matter, you're going to offend everybody in that office building. And everybody knows it. One of the things that you really can't do right now is be angry. Certainly not an angry white male. And here comes Ben Shapiro, who does not care. But what happened when they started making money, it seems, and when they started this project, was they started to care quick. They started to care quite a bit. And it has always felt like the Daily Wire was on rails. And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you think about it, and I've always had this question, how come YouTube has never taken them off the air? I know that, I'm sure it's happened a couple of times. Again, I wasn't paying attention for quite a while, but they're still on. They're still up. Maybe they are demonetized. I don't know. But especially people like, let's say, Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh, who talks a lot about trans issues. That's a hot button problem for whether you're on Twitter or YouTube. It should get you taken off, right? It should get you demonetized. There are certain things that you can't say. There are certain things you can't make fun of. And that's the Daily Wire's bread and butter, is that they talk about these, in my opinion, very irrelevant TikToks, right? That's really what the Daily Wire sort of devolved into. And I would say the same about Steven Crowder, is that they all talk about, how insane and mentally ill people on TikTok are. And it's like, yeah, we know, man. The world's ending. Are you going to talk about the fact that the world is ending today, or what? How's the debt ceiling? Is that still a problem? I know they talk a little bit about those things, but it just seems like easy content is the order of the day. And to come back to my original point, you got to wonder why YouTube hasn't kicked these people off by now. And I think it is because they've been making deals, and I think it's because they've been sort of trying to become mainstream and offering something. I don't know what exactly, but offering something. And so I really just stopped paying attention, is what happened. And then I heard about the Christ is King hashtag trending on Twitter, and I was amazed to find that it was about Andrew Klavan, of all people, on the Daily Wire, and his response to the Candace Owens firing. Now, I don't know anything about the Candace Owens firing. For all I know, and for all you know, she was a nightmare behind the scenes, and they were just looking to get rid of her. I'm not really sure that that's the case. I have a feeling that it really had a lot to do with her takes on Israel. I think that is not a new opinion by any stretch of the imagination. If you look at the comments of a lot of the Daily Wire videos, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see a lot of people talking about Israel and the seeming massacre that's going on over there. And a lot of people are really upset that our fingerprints are all over that. And they should be. They should be. Because we're effectively funding it. And if this is the massacre that it looks like, I think that conservatives have every right to be mad about not only the money that we have been handing over to Israel all these years, while our debt goes through the roof. Our debt is what is it now? What Mickey Mouse number do we have now? $34 trillion? Nobody can even understand how much money that is. We literally cannot imagine how much money that is. We don't have the money to pay this back. And it feels like simultaneously, somehow we found the funds to fund a genocide in the Middle East. Again. So I started looking at this Klavan video. And again, you have to remember, I've been out of the scene for a little while. I was watching Steven Crowder throughout the 2020 election and the pandemic. I think that was he was actually pretty good. I honestly had to skip the skits. That I think those are for him more than anybody else. I'm not sure anybody really enjoys those skits, but Steven Crowder, he had a good show for a little while, and I believe that it too devolved into sort of TikTok reaction videos, which I don't care. I really don't. I don't think it's relevant. I understand that there are lunatics out there, and there are people who are desperate for attention. We know that. That's not new, and it's not news, and it's certainly not conservative news. So I've been out for a while. I have been paying attention to the news, but it's been through Jimmy Dore, of all people, who is a leftoid. He's a leftist, but he's honest, which is all a lot of conservatives really want from their hosts, is honesty. They want to feel like they're really getting the news. And it's felt like for a long time we haven't been getting the news. Not really. A lot of conservative talk show hosts will not criticize Israel, for example. And a lot of conservatives have had concerns about that for a very, very, very long time. And now it feels like we should have been more aggressive about that. I certainly think so. Because I wasn't. And I fell for the Israel thing. Hook, line, and sinker. I have no problem saying I have been pro-Israel this whole time. And to a certain degree, I still am. That conversation, I think, is for another video. But I think what the Daily Wire seems to have misunderstood about its audience is that conservatives really do care about the truth. And you can be pro-Israel as an ally and as a Jewish state and still be worried about bad choices being made by governments while they kill innocent people. And I for some reason, I think the Daily Wire has just completely... The Daily Wire, which, by the way, has been so interested in maintaining that sense of nuance about issues like COVID or Trump, suddenly, nuance goes out the window. Right? All of a sudden, nuance doesn't exist. Okay, so Klavan comes out with this sort of response to the Candace Owens firing. And the one thing I will say about Andrew Klavan's video right out the gate is good for him. Honestly, good for him. There were a bunch of hosts who refused to acknowledge that this even happened or give an opinion on it. I think that's cowardice. I really do. And Andrew Klavan came out and he actually sort of opened his heart to us. And for that, he deserves, in my opinion, an immense amount of respect. But one of the things I'm going to include my reaction to Andrew Klavan's video in a minute, and it's an old reaction. I did it within a couple of days of it coming out, and you're going to hear my real responses to the things that he's saying. But one of the things that he brings up is Nick Fuentes, and that blew my mind. And of course, I didn't really realize how much Christ the King as a Twitter hashtag was connected to Nick Fuentes. But I guess my concern here is that you'll hear it in my reaction. But one of the things that that really blew my mind was the fact that you would talk about Nick Fuentes at all. first of all, you got to spend way too much time on the internet to talk to even know who Nick Fuentes is. And of course, the next question is, why would you consider him a threat? Really? And I'm not saying that Andrew Klavan is playing some kind of 4D chess game in mentioning Fuentes, but the next video that I respond to in this one is a discussion between Jeremy Boring, the co-founder of the Daily Wire, and Nick Fuentes himself. And that was within a couple of days of the Klavan video on the Candace Owens firing. And that's when I started to realize, oh my God, this is something. This is a thing. For whatever reason, however it happened. I'm not saying that Klavan had any idea, had any foresight or that this was a plan or something like that. I don't think that it was. But I do think that Jeremy Boring is very clever. I think that he is a very intelligent person and that he may have seen things and ways to start to pivot the Daily Wire into the future through Nick Fuentes, which is one of the most bizarre things I've ever said. It's such a bizarre. This is such a bizarre term. It really is. I'm gonna play my initial reaction to Klavan's video now, but what I want to really stress while we're talking about Klavan's video is that this is not just about what Klavan was talking about, which is the relationship between Jews and Christians and what it means to be a Christian and who gets saved and who doesn't. What you have to remember is that the true context of this is that Candace Owens was fired very probably because of her opinions on the Israel genocide in Gaza. That needs to be, you need to keep that in mind the entire time that he's talking about stuff that by comparison seems so irrelevant. And one of the things that he mentions in his reaction is that there is a stain on nations that reject Jews, that something happens to the spirit, to the soul of nations, and that eject Jews from them, and that they wither and die. And I talk about that a little bit in my reaction. But if that's true, if Andrew Klavan is right, that a nation state's actions can have a devastating effect on its soul that causes it to shrink and shrivel and die, that we can actually stain ourselves with something so badly that it blows up in our face and that it can cause our collapse. Should we be involved with a genocide? Is that something that we should keep doing, Andrew Klavan? That is something that we should be very concerned about. And for the Daily Wire's seeming reaction to be more about almost everything else, except the concern of its viewers, is very telling to me. Very telling. I am so glad I stopped watching the Daily Wire a long time ago. Thank God. Thank God. Because this really would have been upsetting to me if I had wasted as much time as some people have listening to these people. So, without further ado, let's get into the video.
But let me just say first that I know the big hit, the thing that is going to come from the right, the people who think that the attack we're going to get from the right, because who cares what attack we get from the left? They kill babies. We don't care what they think. But the big hit we're going to get from the right is free speech. And I want to explain this. I'm a big free speech advocate. I used to say there was a free speech purist, but that would be silly. Nobody's a free speech purist, but I'm a very, very strong supporter, not just of the First Amendment, but of the point of view that goes on behind the First Amendment. And this idea that we have canceled somebody for what they say is absurd on the face of it, and I will explain why. I can come in here and express any opinion I want. No one will ever tell me, don't say this, don't say that, or say this or say that. It just doesn't happen. But if I woke up one morning and I thought to myself, you know what? I've been saying abortion is bad, but really it's great. It is great. There's nothing I like better than sucking the brains out of children. In fact, we shouldn't just, do it while they're in the womb. We should just do it all wait till they're 1 or 2 when it's more fun because you can hear them screaming. If that suddenly became my opinion, I couldn't bring it in here because the Daily Wire is not a phone company where anybody can talk. It's not a social media company that I think should let everybody express an opinion. It's essentially an online magazine. It is a journal that stands for something. And one of the things that...
So I guess the question here is, what exactly does it stand for at this point? To pretend as if the stuff that Candace Owens was talking about that she needed to be kicked off the platform for isn't something that there are plenty of conservatives who believe is strange, I suppose I would say. I think that it's weird that a lot of people out there are clearly listening to Candace, right? They are paying attention. From what I understand, Candace Owens was one of the big draws on the Daily Wire. A lot of people are saying, look, wherever she goes, she's going to be okay. What that implies, of course, is that there are conservatives who follow her and what she's been saying for a reason. I don't have an opinion on Candace Owens one way or the other at this point. I've heard a lot of things about her past that make me think that perhaps she's actually just following the waves of popularity and saying things that will keep eyes glued to her streams. I don't know. I really don't. Never looked into it. But what Candace Owens was effectively fired for is going against the idea that Israel at this point is in a defensive war, that it has turned into something genocidal. And I think that the difference between what he's saying and what happened to Candace is that Candace is actually presenting a side of conservatism that really does believe that we have gotten, as Americans, that we have gotten way too comfortable with things that go on in Israel. And I think that a lot of people have been saying that that's something that for some reason Republicans and conservatives have not been able to butt up against, that they cannot shoulder the burden of Israel's genocide anymore. Whether or not Israel is committing genocide is not going to be discussed here in this video today, but to pretend like Candace Owens was saying the equivalent of Satan worship, rather than simply believing that perhaps Israel has gone too far, it's a convenient take for Klavan to take, right?
It doesn't stand for is abortion. And I don't think anyone should come in here. I would quit. I would have to leave. I would have to go in and say, guys, I've seen the light. Killing kids is great, and I can't do that anymore. So I would have to come in and say, as an honorable person, I'm going to remove this. That's something that we can't abide at the Daily Wire because it's not what we stand for. And the same is true of race hatred. And I said this once on Member Block, so a lot of you probably didn't hear it. My problem with race hatred is that it's bad thinking. And the way you know it's bad thinking, my problem with race hatred is religious. I think it's wrong. But the way you know it's wrong and you know it's bad thinking is it works no matter who you hate. if you figure out that the Jews are to blame for everything, or like the New York Times, you figure out that the whites are to blame for everything. You figure it's the blacks, they're ruining everything. It always works. It always makes absolute sense out of everything. And that's because it actually doesn't make sense. It is filling in a lot of nuanced, difficult, detailed things that you have to think about, and it's just spreading this kind of smear of hate over it. And so it always puts things into perspective. Now, having said all this, I don't know what's in Candace Owens' mind. My relationship with Candace has been...
What a weird, weird turn this has taken, right? You start the discussion by talking about the fact that criticism of Israel is somehow connected to race hatred, and then saying, well, I don't really know what Candace Owens is thinking in her head. I mean, who knows what's really going on? But at this point, you've poisoned the well, right? This is simultaneously a subtle and not so subtle technique.
Nothing but collegial and friendly. I would bump into her. I don't know her well, but I would bump into her in hair and makeup. We always greeted each other with pleasantness and friendliness. We always had pleasant little chats. I would see her backstage. I never felt that she wanted my opinion on her work. I never felt invited to give her my opinion on her work. And I am the sort of person who, if asked my opinion on anything, will give it absolutely and bluntly, but never give it when I'm not asked, unless there's somebody standing on my toe. I'm not going to give them I'm not going to volunteer my opinion. So we were friendly, and I certainly have no reason to dislike her personally, and I don't dislike her personally. I've never had any meeting with her where I walked away feeling, wow, I don't like that person. It just didn't happen. And
This is also strange. First of all, the obvious question is why? What would you have told her? What would you have said? Now, I don't think he really goes into that for the rest of this video, but what he's implying here is, look, if she had asked me, I would have told her, cool it on Israel, right? Calm down, be quiet, stop the stuff that you're saying. You know, and again, the obvious question for a lot of conservatives right now is why? Why? This is a discussion worth having. We are giving billions of dollars to Israel. Billions. And at this point, we don't really understand what it's for. And now people are getting really, really concerned. Because it looks like a genocide is happening in Gaza to a lot of bystanders who really haven't been paying too much attention to foreign policy. Because a lot of conservatives, let's face it, discuss social issues at home far more than they discuss foreign policy. You know, to a lot of these sort of conservative bystanders, they're going, well, wait a minute. Why are you dropping bombs on refugee camps? That doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound like the America that upholds morality, right? Which for Christians and conservatives is very important. So Candace was reflecting that argument here. Should she cool it on Israel? And the question for the Daily Wire is, why?
I was on her show once or twice at the beginning, but I never listened to it. And the reason I never listened to it was because of all the stuff that I felt was silly. I mean, some of the stuff I felt I knew what she was going to say, which was the Brexit stuff, which I'm all in favor of. But the stuff about the moon landing being fixed, rigged, and 9/11 being an inside job, she would hint at. And recently there was Mrs. Macron, the First Lady of France, is a man, and all that. It's silly stuff. And the reason it's silly stuff is, one, it's not true.
Yeah, so this is an interesting sort of problem within the Conservative Party right now, right? Is that you have two kinds of conservatives that are breaking away from each other and sort of divorcing from each other. And there's one that's saying, look, we've been lied to for years. It just keeps happening, right? It keeps happening where we think that something is the way we were told it was, right? As somebody, I used to defend going into Iraq. I defended Bush 2 for years and years and years. I was in high school while he was president. And I was in a debate club back then and was often the only guy on my side of the debate when it came to questions about foreign policy, about Bush, about Iraq, we about the global war on terror in general. And there are a lot of conservatives like me out there who fought the good fight and are starting to realize we have been lied to. It took a long time for that kind of stuff to get out. It took a long time to find out that Colin Powell lied about the yellow cake incident. But we started to learn that over time we had been lied to, and we've been lied to by major mainstream news, right? This is why the Daily Wire exists. The Daily Wire exists in no small part because they are not the mainstream media. So this is where the confusion starts. This is where the confusion begins for a lot of conservatives. And this is, I swear to God, I don't know why people watch these guys anymore. And it's because of stuff like this. I don't know why conservatives still listen to people online who keep claiming that they're an alternative to mainstream media, and then, for reasons unknown, will decide to tell you there is no conspiracy. Ever. Stop it. Stop this silliness. It's funny. What comes to mind is an early broadcaster in conservative talk radio named Michael Medved, who used to have he would devote all of his segments, I believe, on Wednesday to conspiracy theories. And what he would do is he would delight in debunking all these callers who would call in with information. And he particularly liked the Sasquatch and Bigfoot stuff for some reason, but it didn't matter what it was. And at a certain point, it was kind of interesting to listen to that stuff because it was kind of the closest thing that conservative talk radio ever got to actually discussing some, conspiracies are fun, right? Conspiracies, whether they are, well documented or not, they are fun to listen to. And so it was kind of fun to listen to the callers, but Medved was always so insufferable to listen to because he would sort of just bat things away in a way that Klavan just did. Right? Klavan, this idea that it's not really true. No, that doesn't really happen. Well, okay, but do conspiracies never happen? A major portion of conservatism right now, a major portion of the platform of conservatism says there is a conspiracy to take down America, right? That there is a conspiracy of sorts from the left that's always existed since, my God, the early 20th century. And there's so much documentation about it, right? These are the same conservatives who, without blinking an eye, will defend the Alger Hiss case and say, hey, look, Hollywood was full of communists who were conspiratorially going around trying to undermine American values from the very beginning. And that we are now finally starting to see the results of that. Why wouldn't you be open to the idea that, for example, the moon landing was faked? I mean, I'm not going to sit here and defend that. I don't know. I don't care, right? But what if it was, and not even in a really important way, right? What if they just realized that they couldn't get video feed from the Apollo missions back down to Earth? So they did a little filming. And they said, look, we're going to pretend, we have a script. We want to make it sound real, but you really are going to go up to the moon. but we're gonna fake the video so that we can play something to the American people. And yeah, it's propaganda, you know. And then you say, you know, they go into their little workshops and they come up with some ideas, you know. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Yeah, that's good. That's good, you know. I don't think that there's why is that so appalling? You know what I mean? Would that really bother you, Klavan? You know? I don't know.
The amount of conspiracy it would take to fake the moon landing with nobody saying that it was fake is insane, and everything that sounds like science about it is ridiculous. It's not true. None of those things is true. 9/11 wasn't an inside job. The moon landing wasn't faked. Mrs. Macron has a daughter who looks just like her. She's not a man. But if they were true, Candace wouldn't know. And I wouldn't know because we don't have that kind of inside information. I don't care what people tell you. That's not the kind of thing that you know unless you are a top investigative reporter and can come up with the documents and show and prove the truth. But all that stuff is show business to me, you know? That's what she does. She has this enormous talent. That's her gift. She has a right to decide how to use it. None of my business. You know, she has a huge audience, I'm sure still. And so I guess they like that stuff. It's nothing to me. It just doesn't mean anything to me. It's not the sort of thing I listen to. But that's the way she wanted to go with her talent. That's a choice that each person makes on his own or her own. And I am not privy in any way, shape, or form to her thinking. Then the Jew stuff started. And here's what I want to say about this. And this is pretty much what I have to talk about because I don't want to attack her personally. I don't know what's on her mind and why she went down this road. Like I said, I just don't know her that well. The left has made bigotry and hatred valuable by calling us bigots and calling us hateful when we tell the simple truth. So,
Okay. So this whole thing is, again, a truly bizarre turn to take here. On the one hand, he says, I have no idea what's going on in Candace Owens' mind, while simultaneously drumming up the idea in your mind. He's seeding the idea here that this is Jew hatred, that ultimately criticizing Israel and what's going on in the Gaza Strip is Jew hatred. Now, I should say here, even if he might be right, because I haven't been following this. I haven't been following what she said on Twitter. For all I know, that she's been on Twitter talking about, that Jews are running the world and that we need to kill them all. I don't know, but what you cannot do is simultaneously say, I don't know what's in her heart, and start seeding the idea that the reason that she's been saying it in her heart is because she has a hatred for Jews. This is bizarre. And what's even weirder about it is he's about to start making the right-left claims, right? This is an old tactic in conservative talk radio in which almost everything, and this is true whether you're listening to Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, or Glenn Beck, almost everything has to be the great right versus left debate. And how we need to band together against the leftoids, because after all, they're the real enemy here. And what do? Well, they're the ones drumming up race hatred. Well, okay. But to claim that somebody is an anti-Semite is using the left's ideas on how to attack someone, is it not? If you call someone a racist because they're criticizing Israel, that is a leftist tactic, right? Because that's the old trick from the left, is you just, you don't really have an argument with somebody. You just call them names. You call them a racist, you call them a bigot, you call them a homophobe, whatever you got to do, but you attack their character first. You take down the character first, and then if you really, really have to, you at that point you deal with the argument. But what this person is doing, what Andrew is doing here, is claiming that Candace is a racist, and that is the primary problem. Really, he's just dancing around the issue.
So I say, there's high crime in black neighborhoods, and the high crime is not because of slavery. It is because of fatherlessness, and it's because of a culture that's going on in certain black neighborhoods that is increasing. And the left says, oh, you're a racist. You're canceled. You stink, Somebody says homosexuality is against my religion. No, you can't host the Oscars. You're out of work. You're called to HR. A man can't become a woman. Oh, my God, you have phobia. That's a phobia to say a man can't become a woman. So the left has used the accusation of hatred and racism, bigotry and phobia to keep us from speaking the truth, which means that when somebody comes along and says something that makes the left go crazy, it sounds like the truth. So I actually got sleep last night. This is true. One of the reasons is Beam Dream. Beam Dream contains
So this is a bizarre ad break, right? Why would you put the ad break here? I don't. This is not important, but this is kind of what I was talking about in the beginning, where the ads just start to invade and invade and invade, and you can't help but almost start to hate capitalism while you listen to this. Here you're trying to they're revving up your brain, right? This is the idea of conservative talk radio is let's really get your brain moving, and then as they get you going, they then start filling the space with advertisements. Buy this, buy that, buy this. And, I'm not saying that that's something that they do on purpose necessarily. And I know, like Klavan himself certainly has not done this, but this is a major problem, a bigger issue with conservative talk radio.
A powerful all-natural blend of reishi, L-theanine, apigen. I don't care. And it's melatonin too, and that helps you fall asleep. Who cares what's in it?
Hey, you got milk? We do. This is 50 cups of milk. Look,
I'm somebody who says exactly what I mean. I have talked about crime in the black community and fatherlessness and the fact that I believe the Great Society has more to do with black crime than anything that ever had to do with slavery. It's not anti-Semitic to attack George Soros. It's not anti-Semitic to disagree with Ben. It's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel or to feel that America should not be supporting Israel or even to believe that the Palestinians have a case to make about the way they've been treated. I have even spoken about the fact that religions are thought processes that feed into modern thought processes, and I've spoken about the fact that secular Jews specifically are more drawn to materialist philosophy because Christians have treated them so badly over the years they can't turn from as I did, turn from their Judaism to Christianity. So there's a lot of things that you can...
Again, there's a lot of non sequiturs here, and that's okay, by the way. I don't... Streaming is really difficult. I mean, there's a reason why I'm not on camera and why there's cuts and stuff like that in this video. I'm not going to come after everybody for, speaking their mind and doing it off the cuff, right? But he is sort of building up here to an argument that says that it's not okay to be critical of Israel because there's like a historical anti-Semitism that has to do with Christendom, and that therefore that we have to sort of make these reparations to the Jews because Jews have been treated badly throughout history. And I think that is the crux of what a lot of conservatives are starting to get turned off by and turn away from. And I think that the Daily Wire needs to wake up to that, but I'm not sure that it can. I think that what's odd about this situation is that, it's the old Voltaire quote, right? If you want to know who your masters are, ask yourself who you cannot criticize, right? And for some reason, there seems to be this sort of weird, amorphous idea that a conservative cannot criticize Israel without becoming this monster. It's just not playing out right.
Say that people accuse you that are true that people call racism. But you guys are smart people, right? And you know that people can use the truth to mask wickedness. You know this, right? The devil does it in the Bible, right? The devil comes up to Jesus, tempt Jesus, and he quotes scripture. He speaks the truth to mask evil, right? So if I'm the kind of brave conservative, which I am, who will sit and talk about high crime in black neighborhoods or criticize Soros, without caring whether I'm called anti-Semitic or anything like that, and you're the kind of person who hates people because of the color of their skin or judges people according to the color of the skin, it's easy for you to blend in with me, right? We're sitting around talking about high crime in black neighborhoods, and you're sitting there going, yeah, the crime in black neighborhoods. But I'm not on your side. I am not on your side at all.
In a vacuum, this is a fair point. This is something that has been a problem with conservatism for a really long time. Racists have, in fact, been hiding behind the intellectualism of conservatism, right? What Andrew Klavan has been talking about for I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes now is the idea that the Great Society is what destroyed black neighborhoods. It's actually not the only thing that destroyed black neighborhoods, of course. The CIA had quite a bit of to do with that, with the Iran-Contra scandal. And that was considered a conspiracy for a really long time, right? But of course, Klavan, I presumably would say something like, that's not real. That's it just didn't happen, even though we actually had very open Senate hearings about it and actually really quite know the history of it at this point. And everybody knows that a lot of the drug trade was perpetrated upon minority neighborhoods by the Central Intelligence Agency. No. Come on. That's just, we just don't know. How do we know? How can we tell? Well, I haven't looked into it, so, I don't think that it's real. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. But, that's true. What he's saying here is true about minority neighborhoods and what happened to ghettos and how well-meaning leftist ideologies have hurt more than helped in the long run. And a lot of that has to do with, we won't get into that right now, but a lot of it has to do with divorce and families and the destruction of the nuclear family around welfare policy. And that's, this is totally true. And this is not, I'm just pointing this out because a lot of conservatives out there will tell you it's not. It is. It is. I've met some of these people who they'll listen to you sort of intellectualize problems with the Great Society and talk about the sociologist George Gilder and his great work on the families and what happened to black communities. And they'll nod and they'll smile. And then they'll do this weird little thing where they'll start testing the waters of what you really think underneath it all, underneath the intellectualism. Those black people, right? You know what I mean? That exists. That's totally real. And I have had personal experience with that. Now, what I would say is, while that is true and while it is real, I don't really know the full power of it. You know what I mean? Is that really what conservatism is underneath the mask? It's not most people. It's not. It is a minority of people. And frankly, they're usually dumb people that aren't important. Okay? So let's see where he goes from here.
I believe that God made us in his image, every single one of us. That is written down. That is scriptural truth. That is right there in the Bible. He made men and women in his image. It doesn't say he made white men. It doesn't say he made black men. It doesn't say anything. It just says men and women are made in God's image. I believe that 100%. I've said this before. I don't know why the left is against racism. Obviously, they're not. They hate white people. So, whatever. They're just against, not having power. That's all they're against. I'm against racism. I believe it's a sin. I believe it's a sin. And God didn't ask me how to make the world. I assume he doesn't want my, opinion about it. And this is the world we're in, and people have different colors. They act in different ways. People of different races do have different cultures, come from different places. Maybe there's genetic components to it. I don't know. I just know. I don't know. That's not in the Bible, and I don't think we have enough science on it. But I just know they're all made in the image of God, and that's the end of the story. As far as I'm concerned, you come to me. I'm looking at you. I'm dealing with you. If you're a criminal, you're a criminal. If you're a good guy, you're a good guy. That's it. I care about the color of your hat, not the color of your skin. So Candace stood by her friend Kanye West when he started spouting crazy stuff about going DEFCON on the Jews. Fine. She has a mentally ill friend. She stood by him, fine. It was a little uncomfortable, but still, so what? She attacked this guy, Rabbi Shmuley. I will tell you, with all honesty, I don't even know who Rabbi Shmuley is. I have no idea. I didn't look him up. I haven't seen anything from him. She's complaining about him. Fine. You don't like a rabbi? You're allowed not to like. You're allowed not to like Ben. You're allowed not to like anybody you don't like. If you can spell it out for me, what the problem is. But when you start saying things like some of those books Hitler burned weren't so bad, I was shocked. This is something Candace actually said. I was surprised to learn that the books Hitler was burning or the Nazis were burning, they weren't good books. They were bad books. They were socialist books. So they burn. That's true. Burning the book is the act of a savage, first of all. And when you start with burning books, you start burning people. But they burned Joseph Conrad, one of my favorite writers, Kafka, Hemingway, Jack London, and yes, some socialists, some of whom were extremely talented and some of whom were extremely interesting, like Karl Marx is an extremely interesting writer with whom I deeply, deeply disagree.
Yeah. So, look. I don't know exactly what was happening with Candace Owens and Kanye West, but I will say this. I think that there is a major difference between agreeing with the things that Kanye West says and acknowledging the fact that when he said it, he lost access to his bank accounts for a little while. And I'm not even sure he ever got his money back. Do we know? Do we know if he ever got his money back? From my understanding, they were able to just cut him off from his money. And so the question, this is a conservative issue in a lot of ways, right? Is the idea that there is a growing cabal out there, some kind of sense that there are people in control of the puppet strings, and if any puppet gets outside of its little window, that you're supposed to pull the strings back. And again, we're back to the conspiracy problem, right? Because it starts to sound so silly. It does. If you haven't been paying attention and you don't really listen to the news all that much, it sounds bizarre because your average person doesn't deal with that, right? Your average person, as long as you're not particularly political or doing anything particularly strange, let's call it, if you're a person who gets up and goes to work and you get in the car and you go on your commute and you go to work and you have your half an hour break and you go home, you're just not going to encounter this stuff. And I've met a lot of people like that where, the second that you start talking about the issues around the Kanye West, I guess you'd call it a scandal, their eyes start to go a little bug-eyed because they don't know what you're talking about. They just want to go home and watch Netflix, right? They want to talk about their favorite shows. They want to talk about, the exciting new entertainment that's about to come out. And for a lot of conservatives who watch the Daily Wire or I should say listen, because most people are listening, right? These are people who don't really have time to look into this stuff day to day. But what they do have is a job in which they are doing a lot of manual labor, or they're truckers or something like that, where you need to be on at work, but you can listen to something as a second screen material, I guess you would call it, right? These are people who don't have time to look into this stuff themselves. And what they've been looking for and what they've been trying to get out of stuff like the Daily Wire or the Blaze or Mug Club with Steven Crowder are people who have looked into this stuff and are telling them about it. There is a reason why Tucker Carlson is as popular as he is. Right? Tucker Carlson, once he got fired from Fox News, became enormously important to people. It's harder, of course, for them to get access to his show because he's been bouncing around. He's on Twitter, he's on Rumble, he's on, there's clips of him on YouTube. I think they finally figured it out where they're putting out full episodes on YouTube. Because a lot of people, honestly, they just throw on YouTube. As much as we'd like to believe that they're not doing that, as much as we'd like to believe that they're going to Rumble or whatever, I think most people believe, or most people are just going to YouTube. And, this is what I wish Klavan could understand, is the Candace Owens disaster for Daily Wire is that what the Daily Wire has really initiated here is scrutiny into its own anti-mainstream media claims. It's not, for a lot of conservatives, we've known for a long time that the Daily Wire has limitations. It has limits. It's on rails. It's always felt like it's been on rails. It talks about certain things. It has no problem discussing certain things. And from my perspective, I gotta tell you, I have always wondered how they weren't kicked off YouTube. Here's a conspiracy for you. Why hasn't Daily Wire been kicked off YouTube when Matt Walsh does nothing but rant about trans people and trans rights? How is that allowed? Without, of course, becoming demonetized. Now, maybe he was demonetized. Again, I haven't been paying too close attention. But I don't think they have. And so it's almost like there is some kind of rail system that Daily Wire is on, where they've made some kind of deal with the devil. Not literally, of course, but metaphorically speaking, they've sort of said, hey, listen, we'll stay within a certain parameter, okay? And I think what's happened here is that Candace Owens may have gone off the rails. And they had to let her go because she was putting the ship in danger. Which, by the way, fair enough. But let's stop talking about these guys as if they're, not just like not just another Fox News or MSNBC. No, they have their own puppet masters.
I don't burn his books because I'm not a savage. When you start saying that, that's a dog whistle. I'm sorry. I know it's a leftist phrase. I know they use it, randomly with anything you say. I understand all of that.
A dog whistle. So he doesn't know what's in Candace Owens' heart. But she's dog whistling to neo-Nazis? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Now look, if you disagree with Candace Owens on the book burning issue, I haven't seen Candace Owens' take exactly, so I'm just going to use Klavan's version of what she said here. It sounds like she was defending the book burning that was going on in Nazi Germany. I don't believe in book burning. Most conservatives don't believe in book burning because we don't like the idea that the truth has to be guarded that way. The truth shines on its own. That's the old conservative way of life, right? God is truth, and truth is the way, and the way is always the way. And you don't need to attack other ways of life through tyranny to see that the way is the light. You don't need to do that. You'll see it, you know, as Jesus said, you'll know them by their fruits. You will see the truth sort of shining a light on the path that you should take, because it will get you places. It will not materially, but spiritually. You know, and as woo-woo as that might sound to some people, that was the old conservative take. So book burning is not necessary. It is not necessary to clamp down on the idea that books and ideas need to be stomped on and stomped out, right? So this is all fair. This is all a fair point. The question is whether or not we should be thinking about those things. This is a take that I've heard before. This is a take that some conservatives have had, right? I went to a fairly conservative college, and my first seminar that I ever went to was this small little seminar from somebody who was arguing for censorship. And to my school's credit and the students that I was with, he was not popular. A lot of people came in and started ripping this guy apart as soon as he was done with his speech. The Q&A session was a total bust up, and you know, that actually made me feel pretty good, because I wasn't sure at that point about that school until until that moment. But having said that, there are, you know, that guy was a conservative, and there are conservatives out there who will argue for censorship. So the conversation should be had, I think. I think it's okay to have that conversation about, hey, what is the role of censorship? When do we stop this? Because the thing is, if you're going to claim that there shouldn't be any censorship at all, and of course book burning is a step above censorship, right? That's a physical ritual, which is something quite different than what I'm talking about. But the conversation should be had, because this conversation is being had in places like schools and libraries now, right? Where people are saying, look, you're censoring free speech by not allowing certain things to be shown or checked out in libraries. And the argument against that is, yeah, but there are children here, there are families, the library has to stand for something. And there is an argument to be had, even within conservative circles, about at what point censorship really does become censorship. And a lot of it has to do with jurisdiction. We're not going to have that discussion now, of course, but, I think that what I would say to Andrew on this issue is, look, we have to be able to have that discussion. And Candace Owens, for better or for worse, if she was talking about book burnings that way, that is a discussion to be had. If you don't agree with it, argue. The truth will win. The truth always wins. That's the conservative argument, correct?
Still, the depredations of the Nazis against the Jews are one of the most well-documented, recorded atrocities in human history, because they're Germans. They're Germans. They keep records. They keep very good records. We know these things happen. They weren't burning books. They also hated Einstein because his science was Jewish science. They hated Mendelssohn, one of their great composers, because his music was Jewish music. That's the way they thought. It's lunacy. It's lunacy to think that way. So when you start to say, well, some of those books they burned are bad books, I'm sorry. That's a dog whistle. When you retweet a post saying a Jew is drunk on Christian blood, which goes back, as I'm sure you know, to old blood libel that Jews eat Christian children, that's a dog whistle. When you start to refer in this kind of clever way to certain group of people in Hollywood corrupting blacks and killing.
Again, I don't know what the tweet was that Candace Owen retweeted about Christian blood. I have a feeling that it perhaps was connected to the idea that there are Christians in Gaza, and that if you are sort of maniacally defending Israel while it obliterates Gaza, you are forgetting about the Christians that live there as well. And if that was the context for that, it's not really the same thing as, the medieval concept that Jews were poisoning wells and that they were eating and stealing Christian children.
Michael Jackson, you're not allowed to then put on an innocent look and say, well, I'm just saying there's certain people, just a few, it's not, I'm just saying, you're messing with us. You're messing with us, and everyone knows it, and no one is fooled except those people who want to pretend to be fooled because they hate the Jews.
This is an interesting problem that goes for everybody. This is something that a lot of people deal with now, I think, is a sort of cultural PTSD from the amount of sort of verbal and physical violence thrown at each other over the generations. I think for Jews, this is particularly bad because obviously they have relatively recently dealt with what has probably been the worst genocide that we've seen for, in recent history, the Holocaust. And so, when you have your sensors up in a way that other people don't, you can become hypersensitive. And I'm not sure that I blame the Jewish people for this at all, but I think that this may be a situation where we're actually seeing the mindset of Israel itself here, right? Because what is it? I think it's the Israeli Secret Service's motto is "at any cost," and what they've been saying is effectively that we will never allow the Holocaust to happen ever again. And we don't care what it takes. Honestly, that is a huge problem. It is. And it's a real line in the sand between Christianity and Judaism right now. Because Christians don't believe that at all. They don't believe that you should defend yourself at any cost. Christian martyrs have been the heroes of Christendom for a very long time, for a reason. Because those martyrs said, we don't believe in at any cost. And that doesn't mean that you don't defend yourself. And it doesn't mean that you don't fight evil. But for Jews, I think there's a sort of survivalism instinct that has kicked in here, and we're sort of seeing it in real time with Klavan's takes here. I know that Klavan became a Christian. We're about to get into that issue pretty soon here, I think. But for Klavan, I think as a culturally Jewish man, I think we're seeing the way that Israel thinks about things here.
The biggest truth that Candace told in that way that I find, again, and this is not personal animus toward her, but I find difficult to excuse this when anybody does it. The truth that hid wickedness that I thought was the most wicked truth to use was the truth that Christ is king. It is almost exactly 20 years since I acknowledged the kingship of Christ in my life and over the universe as well. It's like 2 weeks, and it'll be 20 years since my baptism. It was hard for me to do. I'm a proud man, and I want to be king. I want to be in charge of my life. I want to take credit for the good things that happened to me. I want to say, what my opinion is about right and wrong. I don't want to bend the knee to anybody. And people who know me will tell you, I don't bend the knee to anybody except Christ the King. And the day I took off my paper crown and bowed my knee before his crown of golden light, I became a true man and a free man, and the joy in my heart has only grown. When I did this, by the way, the priest who baptized me said, Christians won't accept you. You'll still be a Jew. And I said, well, I am. That's.
So this is where things have taken a turn now. I don't know why the priest would tell him that, to be perfectly honest. I don't think I've ever heard of a Christian that I've known ever say something like that about Jews. That no matter what, it's not even a Christian idea, right? The Christian idea of baptism is ultimately what created the concept of American citizenship, right? This idea that it doesn't matter where you come from. What matters is where you end up. What matters is that you change, you morph, you create a new being when you're baptized. You are washed clean. And your past no longer matters. You are now with the Lord. You now walk in the light. I don't know where this guy became a Christian. And I'm not even saying that priest or preacher or whoever baptized him was wrong. Maybe there were a lot of anti-Semites in that area. It's not like it doesn't happen, right? But it's certainly it's not a Christian ideal. And those people definitely, by almost anyone's standards that you'll meet, those people are not Christians. They don't believe in Christianity. That is not a Christian concept. So I think he's even about to say, I didn't really experience that myself, and then starts arguing with people that Christ is king is some kind of anti-Semitic dog whistle. And I think that what he's doing here is he's actually arguing with people on the internet. And I just have to say, we have got to get away from arguments on Twitter that people are having with each other and taking them seriously. It's not a place for real ideas to flourish. It's not. I don't know where you came up with this idea that, and I'm not just talking to Klavan at this point. I'm talking to so many people who fight people on the internet, who argue with people on the internet as if it's real, and you don't know who they really are. You don't know if they're just trolls or people who are just begging for attention. There are so many lonely people out there. We know this. We know that about the internet. It's a place where people shit talk each other. And I think that he's about to start really arguing with straw man doesn't even begin to quite cover to cover a description of these people, right? These aren't just straw men. These are total ghosts. He is very possibly arguing with total ghosts.
My race. I'm a Jew. I'm proud of my race. It's a great race. It's done many, many great things, including write the Bible. And, I am a Jew. But that hasn't happened at all. Christians have welcomed me with open arms, except this Christ the King anti-Semitic crowd. Christ is the King, And one day, every knee will bow and recognize it because he's not just my king, he's king of the universe. But when you use that phrase to mean that God has abandoned his chosen people, the Jews, through whom he came into this world incarnate, and that he's broken his promises, his covenant with the Jews, you are quoting scripture like Satan does in the Bible. You are quoting scripture to your purposes, and that to me is specifically wicked. You know, when you
Yeah, and look, I agree with him in a vacuum. If that's really happening, if there is this fundamentalist group of Christians who are out there and they're saying Christ is king as a meme for anti-Semitic concepts, yeah, absolutely correct. It's not Christian. It's not real. It's bad theology. I don't even know where to start. I don't know where to start. It's funny because the thing is, earlier he was talking about the fact that we don't really argue with liberals anymore because they're baby killers. They're not worth talking about. And honestly, I think I agree with that at this point. I think at this point, if you're still a liberal or a neoliberal, I think it's time to just start ignoring you, right? I don't know what. Here's the thing: the conversation has been had at this point. We are in the midst of what C.S. Lewis would call the Great Divorce, and if you want to sort of ignore liberals because they're so nuts, that's fine. But you have to do it for here too, right? You have to do it for the fundamentalist Christian nutcases on Twitter who come out of the woodwork to scream at you because they're unhappy with their lives. Because they would be. They're not walking in the light. So here's this guy who's been triggered by ghosts in the machine. And it is very possibly defending the idea that Candace Owens should have been fired because she said something similar. I'm not seeing it. Maybe there's context here that I'm not seeing, but my main point here is we have got to get away from the Twitter arguments with ghosts. You're very possibly yelling at people who are just if they don't have you to argue with, they delete themselves. Right? That may be as extreme as it is. So let's keep going.
You spit that phrase at Ben Shapiro, my friend Ben Shapiro. And you know, I understand this. All of you who love Ben, and I love Ben, and Jordan Peterson, you all want to see them find Jesus because you know what joy and freedom that gives you, and you certainly feel that it alters your relationship with God. But when I think about this, to be honest with you, you know, and I know some people will disagree with this, but life is not a game show where you guess the name of God and you get to go to heaven. Honk, you know, yes, the name is Jesus. I look at Ben's life and I think if Ben were to embrace Jesus Christ.
Before he gets into this next point, I do want to say, I think that is also true. And I do think that there are too many Christians out there who act like if you are not on the winning team that you don't get to heaven. The simple fact is we don't know who gets to heaven and goes to hell. That is up to God entirely, period. End of story. We don't know. And for all we know, God does in fact allow people who are not Christians into heaven. We're not going to get into this today, but honestly, there are a lot of Christians who get into this sort of bizarre mindset where, you know, they treat their religion almost like they treat their sports teams. And that's a fair point for Andrew to make here. However, to say as a Christian that it almost kind of doesn't matter whether you're a Christian is to also say that you don't really believe in Christianity. Anybody who converts to Christianity because they believe in Christianity is going to tell you that you should also be a Christian, right? Again, I don't want to put words in his mouth here, but we are really, really on the bleeding edge of, dare I say, heresy.
It would cause devastation to his family, to the people who love him, to the people who listen to him, to his position in the world. I just have this feeling that God has put this guy where he wants him to do what he wants him to do. And as you know, I feel that, the Jews were not abandoned by God. I feel the same way about Jordan. Jordan struggles with this stuff, and I feel like I have an inkling of why he has to struggle with it, but his struggle is inspiring to other people. And I think God wants his boys where he's got them, and there's no thought in my mind that he is going to send these guys into battle and then turn his back on them when they come marching home. It's not a...
Yeah, I actually agree with this too. It's important to have a variety of points of view, and sometimes I'm not sure that I really believe that God puts people in positions. But if he does, it would make sense, right? That there are people out there who have a certain point of view based on their background. And so I do think that it's not a bad thing for people to come from all kinds of different backgrounds and do the work of God. There's a wonderful way that people can come to the table with a different point of view and really open everybody else's eyes to it. But the irony of that is that is why a lot of conservatives were saying that the Daily Wire should keep Candace Owens, right? If you're going to say, hey, look, I think that Ben Shapiro is a Jew because God put him there, and Jordan Peterson is not a Christian yet because God put him in that position to be different and to have a different point of view. Doesn't the same also apply to Candace Owens when she says something you don't like or that doesn't quite match up exactly with your take on Israel?
Game show. Christ is love, Christ is truth, Christ is the logos of the moral order. You follow love, you follow truth, you follow the moral order. You will find yourself ultimately at Jesus Christ's door. I don't worry about Ben and Jordan Peterson one little bit. And so when you spit Christ the King at them to insist that they have been rejected by the one who sent them to do the work that they're doing, no. Now, that just doesn't sit with me in the least.
I'd honestly like to know a little bit more about that. What is the dog whistle? I wish he had said that. I wish he'd told us what exactly is the dog whistle. Is the dog whistle the idea that when you say when you respond to Ben Shapiro with Christ is King, that what you're saying is that he as a Jew is partly responsible for Jesus's death as a Jew, that the Jews were the ones ultimately who did not save Jesus from salvation through Pontius Pilate, and that therefore I'm just trying to make up some idea, based on I have heard people say things like that before, but I don't really know. I just don't know what the Christ is King stuff is supposed to be.
So I actually got some sleep last night, so I missed my Helix mattress. Gratitude fills my heart when I reflect on the sheer luxury of a good night's sleep. That's the first I've gotten in years. My Helix mattress isn't just a piece of furniture, it's a wrong race. You gave that...
I am very humbly asking if you could chip in $5, $10, or even $25. I know.
So you gave that image of blackface. I don't like those blackface, and I don't say those things to God because I'm afraid he'll kill me, and also because I know it's wrong, all right? But yes, there is something special and especially wicked about the hatred of Jews, and I will tell you why. It's not worse than other things. It's just special. It is different, and it's central to everything that we love. the hatred of Jews is a hatred of everything that we love. And it comes in disguise. Did you ever wonder why Europe exterminated itself with the Holocaust against them?
This is something that I've been hearing for a long time in conservative circles, is that there's this idea that Jewish hatred is a particularly special hatred, that it is, I think the implication is that it is effectively satanic, right? This is something that Dennis Prager has been pushing for a long time, that Jewish hatred is the canary in the coal mine for when nation states are about to turn evil. And Dennis Prager is also someone who has been pushing for a long time the idea that European nations that jettison its Jewish population ultimately become broke, that effectively they fall, that the civilization collapses soon afterwards, and that Jews in some sense are people who have been propping up civilizations for a long, long time. It's funny because I've never heard a really great argument for that. I know it's been said a lot, and Dennis Prager even wrote a book that I don't think I read in its entirety, but I tried to poke around in this book and really try to get to the answer. His book is called Why the Jews, and honestly, it's an entire book that just doesn't have an answer. Why the Jews? He sort of runs in circles in his mind about the fact that Jews are sort of this moral compass, that they are biblical, and that therefore evil hates them for their existence. And I think that's probably true to an extent, but there are a lot of reasons historically that nations have hated, that have blamed Jews for their problems, and we won't get into that today. But it has, of course, created a situation where Jews are ultra sensitive to anything seemingly anti-Semitic, and I'm not sure that I blame them for that. Honestly, it's, we can sit here and we can talk about the fact that it's ironic that the Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro, who like to claim so often that facts don't care about your feelings, have gotten, their knickers tied up because of their feelings on the supposed anti-Semitism of Candace Owens. But I think that it's important to realize that there is a reason that they do feel this way. And that's okay, but we need to be able to discuss that openly. We need to start talking very openly about why it is that you feel this way. And we can't just keep making generalities like this about how the Jews have been attacked because they are amorphously good, and that they are being attacked by this amorphous sense of evil. And that therefore, if you are not in constant and complete and blind support of Israel or the Jews, that you are somehow on the side of Satan it's a tired argument, and it needs to be put away.
The Jews. Why was that the end of Europe? 2/3 of Europe's Jews, 2 out of every 3 Jews, was murdered in World War II. Some killed in bombing and things like that, but many, many, many of them simply just gassed, murdered. So if the Jews were the problem with Europe, you'd think Europe would thrive afterwards, right? They got rid of the majority of their Jews. Everything should go great now. But in fact, no. What happened was Europe, the greatest civilization that has ever existed on the face of the earth, ever, dwindled to the little nothing that it is now.
Right. So that's what I was talking about, right? There's this idea that, every time that there is a Holocaust, big or small, against the Jews, that you have that soon after that you have destroyed your nation state. I mean, there may be some truth in that, but I mean that really is ignoring the fact that Europe was a shambles after World War II, because it had bombed itself to death twice in a period, a span of 40 years. And it's just a really strange idea, because what it also sort of ignores is the fact that anti-Semitism was rife worldwide, which is his major point, right? One of the major points that this guy is making here is that Jew hatred exists in so many places. It definitely existed in America. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in America, and there were plenty of people in America who were claiming, hey, this Germany stuff really isn't our problem, and we actually don't really care what happens to the Jews. This sort of post-war idea that America was the good guy who came in to save the Jews, that doesn't play out in history. That's not really all that correct. And frankly, a lot of the GIs didn't even know what was going on until they came across the camps, right? So that wasn't even really a determining factor in World War II. A lot of them didn't understand what they were looking at when they came across the Holocaust camps. Which means that really wasn't a part of the discussion and a reason for them to fight in World War II. People weren't joining up to save the Jews. So what about America? Why did America rise like it did and Europe fall like it did in World War II? Well, America was not bombed to death. America was not rubble. And America had a very functioning market and a very functioning set of factories that was able to come in and rebuild Europe. So it's not this conservative talk radio talking point that you hurt the Jews, you hurt your civilization. It may be true sometimes, and for certain reasons that we won't get into today again, but my God, this is a tortured point.
Here's what I believe, and I think it's provable. I think all the documentation shows it. Christianity swept over the German tribes of Europe. The Franks and the Anglo-Saxons and the Germans, all those tribes were Christianized by this, and it imposed on them a morality that held up the love of the poor, the love of women and the rights of women, the rights of individuals, and a kind of more charitable morality. It imposed it on a bunch of savage tribes, That moral system was not just written by Jesus because he's the Son of God, it's also his human patrimony because he was the child of Jews. That is a Jewish morality. Now, is it transformed by Jesus? Does Jesus shine a light back on it that changes it in some ways?
Wow. So, yes, yeah, I suppose it's true that that it would be a Jewish morality, but that is really overlooking the point of the Pharisees in the Bible, right? This idea that the Jews really didn't like God and ultimately chose to save, it was a murderer, right? over Jesus. They effectively told Pontius Pilate on the day of Christ's death, kill Jesus, kill him. We'll save, Pontius Pilate said, look, I'm going to pardon one person. Give me a name. And the Jews chose not to save Jesus. They saved a felon, a convict, real bad guy. That was the point. that sort of pitted Christ against, I guess you would call it mainstream Judaism, right? The idea that there was this idea that Christ was going against the grain, that he was not mainstream, and that he was by his very nature unstable, and that instability was such a threat to the mainline power in Jewish society that they had to make sure he was dead. They had to kill him because he was such a threat to their power. Because he made them look so small. Having said that, yet is it a Jewish morality? It is in a sense, because after all, he is an old, he is God, and God is one in three, right? He is all of those things. And the Old Testament God is God and Christ, who effectively came down to earth to sort of refine concepts that were in Old Testament Judaism, is also God. But to sort of make a claim that one is the same as the other ignores quite a bit of Christian mores.
Yes, absolutely. But that morality was an essentially Jewish morality. And when they talk about the Judeo-Christian tradition, that's a real thing. I understand the differences and all that, but there is this real tradition of care for the poor, of love for your enemies, of kind treatment to the stranger, and all these things. That colonized the minds of these German tribes. People talk about the fact, we stole the solstice tree and turned it into a Christmas tree. That ain't all Christianity did. It totally transformed the culture of those tribes. And every time they wanted to get free of it, they blamed that culture. They couldn't blame Christ because they were all Christians now. They blamed that imposition on the Jews. There's a reason that Germans, so many Germans, like Nietzsche, took off against Christianity and the Jews at the same time. Nietzsche called Christianity a slave morality, right? Because that savage part of him, that part that was still out there in the jungles of Europe, was thinking, no, I don't have to be nice. Why should the losers win? We need an Übermensch, we need supermen, we need strong men to take over and proclaim what morality is, not this love your neighbor stuff, this love your enemy stuff. Schopenhauer, another German philosopher, great German philosopher, said Christianity almost got it right, but the Jews ruined it. The Jews ruined Christianity. Christianity was in conflict in the consciousness of these people with that pre-Christian tribal Germanic ethos. That's why Richard Wagner, right, the great opera writer, he wanted to recreate a pagan German mythology that went back to the Aryan core of the German identity. He hated the Jews with a passion close to madness. Under Hitler, the guy who was burning all those bad books, that funny guy, that funny little guy who wasn't don't hate Hitler. Why should you hate it if you're a Christian? He was just going after those Jews. He had a guy who was the minister of church affairs named Hans Kerl. And this is what Hans Kerl said. He said, God's will, this is the guy who runs the churches in Nazi Germany, reveals itself in German blood. The churches tried to make it clear to me that Christianity consists in faith in Christ as the Son of God. That makes me laugh. True Christianity is represented by the Nazi Party and especially by the Führer, the herald of a new revelation. Well, it was not a new revelation. It was the old revelation, the revelation that had been swept away by Christianity. The Nazis weren't going forward in Christ. They were running away from Christ, running back to the forest where Christ found them. Jew hatred. I've said this a million times, but I'm trying to explain why I say it. Jew hatred is Christ hatred in disguise. Jew hatred is the hatred of Christ in disguise. Listen to what they say. They don't just say Christ is king. The Christ they describe is a pre-Christian Christ, a pagan Christ. And I'm not talking about polite anti-Semitism. We all hate each other. I get that. I don't want you in my club because you have a funny nose or you're black or, you talk in the movies, whatever. There's all kinds of polite bigotry. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that thing where you use the word Jew as a pejorative, as an insult, where you sit around. No one ever says, oh, an Irishman cares about Ireland, so he's a bad guy. Michael Knowles talks about the Pope, so he's not loyal to America.
This is such a bizarre take. First of all, in history, many people have talked about the fact that as Protestant Americans, we should not trust Catholics because they ultimately have an allegiance to the Vatican that they would not have to their nation state. So that is an argument that gets made quite often in history, especially in Anglo-Saxon circles. The UK was rabidly anti-Catholic, ever since the Reformation, obviously, but a major aspect of Anglicanism was the fact that the church could not be trusted and that a Catholic could not be trusted because they were far more. Their allegiance was drawn to the Vatican over their sense of effectively being a free Anglican, right? But this is also just a really bad faith way to set up the Israel argument, right? Conservatives at this point are concerned from what little they're hearing, and we are hearing quite few things about what's actually really going on in Gaza right now. The concern is that there is a genocide happening, right? When you point out an Irishman and say, well, that Irishman isn't truly American because he cares about Ireland, because he likes Ireland, because he loves Ireland. That's very different from saying, I might support Israel's right to existence, and I may love the Jews, and I love the Jewish people. But my God, what is going on in Gaza? You're killing innocent men, women, and children who are huddled in masses and starving, and you're dropping bombs on them and then claiming that it's so that you can get one Hamas leader. And we're just not sure that the math is adding up, that the moral math is adding up. If you are going to claim that the Christ is King crowd is dog-whistling neo-Nazism, you do, in a sense, have to deal with the fact that ultimately Israel may be committing a genocide, that we're not sure that this is a defensive war anymore. I wasn't really going to get into this in this video, and I should cut this short, but it should be said on some level that I understand to a certain extent what's happening in Gaza may have started as a defensive war. We're just not sure about it anymore. And another thing that Americans are becoming confused about is why they're not hearing about it anymore. We're not hearing about it from the mainstream media. I mean, we're talking day-to-day stuff. You really have to be on the internet to even hear about this stuff anymore. And now we're not hearing about it from the Daily Wire, the supposed anti-mainstream media. Well, what are we supposed to think? Every time that we hear anything about what's going on in Gaza, We see what looks like maniacal killing of innocents. So, in a sense, what this has done, and the Candace Owens situation has proved to many people, unfortunately, is that we can't trust the Daily Wire anymore, because it has it. If you don't want to call it if you don't want to call them masters, it has allegiances and tribalism that ultimately Christians don't like. Christians don't like the kind of tribalism that is being shown at the Daily Wire right now, where we're just supposed to blindly trust that Israel is in a defensive war and that it has to do these things. Tribalism is the very thing that Christian ethos is attempting to stamp out. This blind sort of us against them is the very thing that Christ argued against, preached against. We're not supposed to do that. Is that what Christ the King is that what's being said? It's what it's what came to mind, honestly. Are you sure it's a dog whistle against Nazis? Or are we claiming, are we proclaiming as a whole that you cannot just resort to tribalism here? And that we're not sure that we're on the right side, that we might be the bad guys. And that's not what this country is about. There are lots of good conservatives out there who want to be good guys. And if we're not being good guys, that needs to change. That's the concern.
But the fact that Ben loves Israel and is deeply, deeply concerned at this moment of existential threat, that means he doesn't love America, right? It's always, the Jews are special in this way. And when they use that word, the Jews killed Christ, as if that meant, whenever you hear that in the Bible, in the Gospel of John, that means the religious leadership of the time. It doesn't mean the people. When you hear that and when they all get lumped together, you are listening to Christ hatred, to God hatred. So when Jeremy Boring, a Christian man, has to sign a check, a big check, to pay someone to talk about Hitler wasn't so bad in burning books, or a Jew is choking on Christian blood, or Christ is king. When Jeremy Boring has to sign that check, he's doing something that he cannot abide. He cannot abide it. It's not because Ben is his friend. I know Ben is a friend, and he loves Ben, and we all love Ben, and I understand that. But that's not why he can't abide it. People say things, including me, people say things on this outlet all the time that Ben doesn't like and that Ben disagrees with. But Jeremy signs their checks and doesn't stop them. This is too far, not because of Ben, but because of what it really means. It's really this hatred of Jews, this level of hatred of Jews, is a hatred of God, a hatred of Christ. It's a hatred of Jesus Christ. I know they say, oh, no, it's because the Jews, Nick Fuentes, he says, the Jews' religion is based on rejecting Christ. That's crap. The Jews were around for a long time.
Yeah, so this isn't the first time I've heard this video, but this is the first time I noticed him point out Nick Fuentes. We got to go back to the original point I was making about Twitter. You cannot be seriously arguing against people like Nick Fuentes if you want to be taken seriously right now. And I'm not even going to get into who Nick Fuentes is. I don't know that much about him because he doesn't matter. He doesn't matter. Why is the Daily Wire talking about Nick Fuentes of all people? And honestly, this is a question that I've had for a long time. Who is the audience of Daily Wire at this point? Here Klavan is talking about Nick Fuentes, a guy that you really wouldn't know about unless you spent way too much time on the internet. but their audience seems to be boomers who are like driving their truck to and from work, or driving a truck period for work, or doing landscaping on their property, or blowing leaves around or something. So who are you talking to? At this point, you're not talking to your audience, and you're arguing with people who are mentally ill and not in a good place in life and do not matter as anything more than lolcows. And I just don't know. This is the spiral I've been talking about with conservative talk radio. It has completely lost its mind. And I think it just, there's so much time people spend on the internet. And I get it. You have to kind of be on the internet to do this job that Andrew Klavan is doing, right? You have to be on Twitter. You have to know what's going on. You have to sort of have your finger on the pulse of the discussion. But at what point do you take a step back? Just take a step back and realize, this Nick Fuentes guy, he says a lot of crazy stuff. Oh well. Forget it. That guy doesn't matter. Nick Fuentes, who's that? Because I guarantee you, none of the regulars who are actually paying for a subscription know who Nick Fuentes is.
Time before they were prepared to bring Christ into the world. That is not what defines the Jewish religion. When I, who have given my life to Christ, who have bowed to Christ as I have bowed to nothing else on this planet, who bends the knee before Christ the King, and I come on this outlet, which I was at from the very beginning, which I helped to build, this outlet that I love. I admit it, I love this place.
And I believe that Andrew Klavan believes that. And kudos to him. It's not easy to change things the way that it would take quite a bit for a Jewish person to become a Christian based on what he's been saying here today. Right? For Christendom in general, and Europe, and the people who have sort of who have throughout history taken over Christendom at times to do what they do to Jews, and then to have a Jewish person knowing all that turn to God anyway, turn to Christ as King anyway, is commendable, extremely commendable. I think the problem here is just that Klavan is not necessarily seeing that a lot of conservatism is making a delineation between Jews and Israel. And what's weird about that is that if you knew anything about Christendom, that is something that Christendom has been doing for itself for a long time. There is a major, major difference in many Christians' mind between Christians, let's say, and the Vatican or the Holy Roman Empire. This isn't coming out of nowhere, and you can't just keep telling yourself that this is some kind of bizarre Satanistic takeover of Christian theory. This is something that has been going on for a long time. Christians have known for a very long time that the Vatican, that the Holy Roman Empire, that Christendom as nation states can do evil, great evil. One of the popes recently said in the 20th century, Satan has entered the church. And for a lot of Christians, that wasn't news. Okay? So this isn't just Christians saying that Jewish people and Israel are the same, and that therefore what I hate about one, I hate about the other. It's not that simple. And maybe he just doesn't understand that yet. Maybe he's not quite steeped in the culture yet. Okay, so here's the fallout of all this, right? So this is a video that came out after the Andrew Klavan video. And I wasn't. My first instinct was to just treat the Andrew Klavan thing as if it was its own thing and just leave it at that. Move on. Not really. It's mildly interesting. It's kind of entertaining. It's kind of nice to go back to the idea that like Christians are talking about Christianity again, and I think a lot of conservatives sort of jumped on that. If you look up anything about the Andrew Klavan video, it's a lot of. It feels like 2013 again, is what it feels like to me. It feels like old school politics, old school, Republican conservatives talking about Christianity and what it means to be saved, and it felt a little less apocalyptic. And I think that Jeremy Boring, the co-founder of Daily Wire, probably is jumping on that. And I found this random video. Maybe it's not so random, but I don't know what this is. It seems to be hosted by Lauren Chen, I think, who is one of the journalists for The Blaze. I might be totally wrong about that. Again, haven't really been paying attention to the sphere for a while. So she's doing some kind of a hangout, and I guess Nick Fuentes is on it. And I'm wondering, I cannot stress this enough. I don't know why Nick Fuentes is being paraded around right now. I don't know if this is just simple. Maybe it's just content farming. I don't know what people are doing, but to give Nick Fuentes any kind of legitimacy right now is so bizarre to me, and to the point that I can't help but wonder if this is on purpose. What's even weirder about this is that Jeremy Boring actually shows up and starts talking to Nick Fuentes. Jeremy Boring is a multimillionaire, presumably, co-founder of one of the, I guess I would say probably the top 3 conservative talk show, or not talk shows, but talk radio conglomerates in the nation. If not the number one, they're in the top 3. And here Nick Fuentes is talking to a journalist, I think from The Blaze, also in the top 3. And Jeremy Boring shows up to talk to him. And what happens is so bizarre. This is so strange that I can't help but think that this is all on purpose. I'm not saying that Lauren Chen did this on purpose. I'm not saying The Blaze is pushing Nick Fuentes on purpose. I think Nick Fuentes and the Christ is King crowd it just has this little moment in the sun. But I do think that Jeremy Boring is attempting to capitalize on this to turn attention away, probably from Israel and what's going on in Gaza. Because again, this feels comforting on some level, right? Oh, it's so nice. It's so nice to talk about something that isn't apocalyptic and to laugh and to debate with like a white supremacist, right? It feels so nice by comparison. So I don't want to do this whole video, but but let's just start talking, because again, just listen to how this goes for a little while.
Because the important thing, I think the operative word is context. I think everybody here acknowledges, everyone here who's Christian, maybe not Andrew and Adam, but everyone here who's Christian would affirm that there is nothing, as you say, per se anti-Semitic or problematic about saying Christ is king. It's a fact. But to the point, so really the operative word is context. In what context is it being used? I think that's a point you're making. That's a point that Klavan made. What I'm interested in is everyone's focusing on whether Christ is king is anti-Semitic. But what was a little bit more shocking to me in what Andrew Klavan said was about Ben Shapiro. And he said that he would not wish Shapiro to become Christian because if Shapiro became Christian, it would cause devastation to himself and everybody in his life. And he almost seemed to suggest like that we shouldn't try to convert Shapiro, like to come on to him in this way and say, you should be Christian, Christ is king, even in the context of evangelizing. Klavan seemed to push back on that and say, actually, God put Shapiro where he needs to be and doesn't want Shapiro to be Christian, doesn't want Shapiro to say Christ is king because he's, pushing family values or something in his station as head of Daily Wire, or rather as the head pundit on Daily Wire. So I'm wondering, do you agree with that? What is your position on what Klavan said? Because to me, I think that's the important context when he said that Christ is king is anti-Semitic. And I think a lot of Christians were offended by that.
I think it's a bit of a misrepresentation of what Drew said, though I will acknowledge that Drew is often more clear because he's often more prepared. He went on the air that day and spoke from the heart, which isn't always what he does. He's usually more prepared than that. Drew, and also I want to be clear that Andrew Klavan can speak for himself and he's not here. But knowing Andrew Klavan and knowing his relationship with Ben Shapiro and knowing a lot about his theological outlook, having read his book, The Great Good Thing, about his own conversion, I think that it's fair to say that Drew was not implying that there is a way to the Father that doesn't go through the Son. I think that what he was saying is God is sovereign. He has people where he wants them. He has someone like Ben where he wants him. He has someone like Jordan Peterson.
Okay, so that's the conversation that's being had right now. And I think I just there's something suspect about it to me. I don't know. It seems like the conversation that we should be having at a time into, this is an election year. There's even if you wanted to claim that this was some kind of slow news day, is this really what conservatives should be focusing on? Whether or not a talking head at the Daily Wire was completely and totally correct about how somebody gets saved or when somebody gets saved or what it means to be saved when Israel is in the midst of a genocide. And of course, this is Jeremy Boring and Nick Fuentes. That's the only reason I really say this. Because, look, if you're a Christian, you care very much about those things. I did. It bothered me. The Andrew Klavan video genuinely bothered me enough that I wanted to make my own response to that. But of all the things that you think that Nick Fuentes would bring up and hammer Jeremy Boring on, why would they be talking about this? And it almost, look, I'm not a big conspiracy theory nut, but it almost makes me think that they're in cahoots, right? That you create this problem, that you create this fake debate around something that Andrew Klavan said, and you take the discussion far, far away from foreign policy, and you start talking like it's 2012, 2013, 2014 again, and you give all these conservatives they're binky. This is like a little binky that a baby would carry around with them for comfort. So nice. So nice to talk about this again. Here's what really set off my red flags though, because this whole conversation is, I'm not sure it's really worth listening to. It's exactly how you think it goes, but except they are way, way more cordial than you would think. Because let me tell you something. If I was Jeremy Boring, and I actually started talking to a white supremacist who I felt was a Nazi, like Nick Fuentes, I don't think that I would be very nice to him. And I don't think that I would debate this person. But they are, because, hey, it's content that isn't about Israel. It's content that isn't about the apocalypse. It's content that isn't about Trump and all the things that could tear apart the conservative party, if you want to call it that at this point. But we're going to skip all of this. We're going to go right to the end. And you tell me if this is something that you expected somebody like the co-owner of the Daily Wire to say to Nick Fuentes ever. Well, let's just start about here.
like they can extend charitability towards me when I say, hey, I love you guys, but you make these edgy jokes. So I get it. And I think that as I get older, I'm trying to reel that in. Because, you got to remember, I got my start when I was 18 years old. Ben Shapiro was attacking me when I was 18, calling me an anti-Semite. I was under attack by Reagan Battalion and Benny Politzik around my 19th birthday. And as I've gotten older, I've come to, I think, moderate myself a little bit in some ways. Some would say the opposite, but at least internally that's happening. So I get where you're coming from, but my strong position is just that we got to put America first. America's got to be a Christian country. And as long as guys like Shapiro cannot say Christ is king and they refuse to say America first, I think it's notable. Ben Shapiro has never uttered those words. I don't think they should have leadership in America. So, people can say, well, I don't like what you say about this and that. I don't like that guys like Shapiro will not say Christ is king, America first. I think they forfeit their ability to lead. I would never listen to somebody that can't say those things because, those things are really the foundation of wisdom, which is the love of God, which, as you say, goes through the Son, as we all know, can only go through Jesus, and oikophilia, which is, your love of your home, your love of your homeland that you reside in, not some other homeland. So I just want to get that across to you. It's kind of a strange circumstance that we're talking, but that's how I feel about it.
And I'll say this, Nick, that I listen to your show quite often. I think you're one of the most talented people out there, and I'm very concerned about some of the things that you're saying. I wish, I think that you're a very gifted communicator, and so it's hard for me to imagine that you consistently miscommunicate some of these things. And I'll hope that I'm wrong and yield the floor back to all the people who actually came on here to talk to each other.
What?
Something has to happen with Iran. There has to be some diplomatic bilateral.
Thanks, YouTube. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? You think he's a gifted communicator and you listen to his show all the time? Why? You don't there is no connector between Jeremy Boring and Nick Fuentes on any political scale, like whatsoever. Why would you listen to him at all? Especially the people at the Daily Wire who over and over and over again have pushed the moderate conservative agenda, right? These are very moderate people. What are you talking about? And it seems to me like one of two things is happening. It is possible that Jeremy Boring is one of those people who thinks that if you are nice to somebody and you just show up and you pour sugar in their ear, that they'll, agree with you or give you things. And, sometimes that works. It's not the worst strategy in the world, but it's a bizarre one when somebody who owns the Daily Wire, which has been so pro-Israel, suddenly becomes this close with Nick Fuentes. I have to wonder if it's the second option, which is that there is something afoot, that something is going on here. And I gotta wonder if maybe here's what I think may be happening here. I think that the Daily Wire is pro-Israel and as such is starting to feel boxed in by its own audience. I think that there is a sense that they have that the walls are closing in around them and that conservatives are not happy about where we're at when it comes to our position with Israel. Forget the genocide. Forget the genocide. I think a lot of conservatives are becoming more and more and more upset about the fact that their groceries keep going higher and higher and higher in price, that the national debt is getting to a point where we can no longer handle it. We can no longer pay it back, period. That we're going to have to work out some kind of deal for bankruptcy, and that we are still giving as much as we are to our quote-unquote allies. And we give even more than that in terms of not more than we give to Israel, but we certainly give even more to people that we would consider our enemies. But at least in each of those cases, the government can kind of say that we get something out of it, that we're getting this or that, or this. The more that you look into each specific one of those cases, we have some kind of deal, we have some kind of treaty. There's a market available to us that wouldn't be available to us otherwise. Okay, fine. Conservatives, I think, at this point are getting really concerned that we're not getting anything from Israel, and that this is some kind of weird MK Ultra mind poison that's been poured into conservative ears for decades. Decades. I know that from my perspective, I've been asking people this a lot lately. When was the last time that you heard a conservative talk radio show host criticize Israel? Really? And I think that the last time we did was Candace Owens. I'm trying to think about a time before that. I think, I think I may have talked about this already, but Dennis Prager did one time. And it was fairly recent. But I used to listen since I was a kid. And it just wasn't done. It was not done. Really? Israel has nothing to criticize? If you're going to bring it up as often as they did, and they did, Israel was talked about easily every day. At least once. Just at least once per show. And not a single time are you going to talk about, I don't know, the taxes. Are the taxes perfect? Is the medicine perfect? Everything's going great, and the only thing that you ever need to talk about is when Israel gets attacked by Palestinians instead. Okay. But I think a lot of conservatives. I mean, if you look at the comments, the comments to this video, the comments to the Andrew Klavan video. There's a lot of comments. I think I want to do an episode on their talk about. They did some kind of a live stream or something, or a round table about the MGTOW movement. Not a lot of good comments. And I do wonder, is their subscriber base finally disappearing? Are people finally starting to realize, wait a minute, these people may not be our friends? And if that's true, the Daily Wire is going to have to pivot. They haven't really been pro-Trump. They haven't been pro-populist. They haven't been talking about a lot of the things that conservatives have been worried about. That's not really their market anymore. So what do they have to do? In my opinion, what they may very well be doing is setting up Nick Fuentes as a foil. Because you got to do something. And one of the talking points of moderate conservatism for so long has been, well, there's this dark group, this angry crowd that's been developing, a cloud over conservatism, and it's all racism enshrouded in concerns about fiscal policy and Christianity and social mores. But really, you know what it is? It's racism. It's anti-Semitism. Oh, they can dog whistle all they want, but you know what they're really all about. Well, they need somebody, right? They need somebody to lead that group, really. Because if it's this amorphous cloud that they kind of keep talking about, and every time they sort of scream racism, they're pointing at somebody who's really kind of a loser. That's not really an argument that they can make very well. So what I have a feeling Jeremy Boring was doing here was building up Nick Fuentes. He's building him up. He's gonna start turning him into a leader. They may even start to have him on. I would not be surprised to find that these people start talking about Nick Fuentes as if he is this great leader of this great movement. Because then what Daily Wire can do is say, look, we tried to talk to these racists. We tried to talk to these anti-Semites, but they just wouldn't listen to reason. And so we can no longer consider ourselves conservative. We are still very much pro-America, pro-fiscal responsibility, pro-social conservative mores, but we can no longer consider ourselves Republican. We're not Trumpists. We're not like these racists. And what they're positioning themselves as is the ultimate moderate. Somebody who can now start to play both sides. Because I have a feeling that what they're starting to worry about is their support in Congress for Israel. That may very well become an enormous problem to them in the future. As conservatives and as populism sort of takes over conservatism, are they going to lose a lot of votes in Congress for big billion-dollar packages for Israel? And if that happens, are they going to have to go to the other side? Because up until now, it's just been conservatism. That was where a lot of their bread and butter came from. Republicans. I think that there are more and more liberals, more and more progressives, more and more Democrats who are becoming pro-war. They're pro-Ukraine war in a way that Republicans are not. They're pro-Israel in a way that Republicans are not, or at least some Republicans are not. And I think they have to make a maneuver to become more popular with those people. And in order to do that, you have to step away from conservatism itself. But of course, the problem is that their audience has been built up by them since what, 2000? Oh my goodness, the 2010-ish, earlier than that. To be conservatives who are looking for somebody beyond the mainstream to get their news. And now that they need to pivot, they need a reason to do that. They need an excuse. They need to keep their subscribers, but they need those subscribers to know we're not like those people. So you build up the anti-Semite. And you say, no, we're not like that person. And I think that's what's going on here. And if it is, it'll be interesting to watch, I suppose. But I really hope it doesn't work.